Hey class. So we have been learning about this time period in American history after the Constitution after they start writing the Constitution. They have to kind of decide about ratifying the Constitution, and they have to decide about specific things that they want in the Constitution. Remember, we talked about the different compromises that they had to make, such as the Great Compromise, which was based off of the New Jersey Plan and the Virginia Plan. The New Jersey Plan being based on, equality for everyone, so equal representation for everyone. And that is where we get our Senate today from, our Senate that we have, where we have 2 representatives per state. And then the Virginia Plan, which was also known as the Large State Plan, was this idea based on population. So they thought representation in Congress should be based on population. And so that is actually where we get our House of Representatives today. So under the Articles of Confederation, we had one house just Congress was one house, one body. And now currently, from the Constitution and today, we still have a bicameral legislation, which means that we have 2 houses, right? So we have the Senate and the House of Representatives that make up our Congress. And so when they compromised and decided to have 2 houses, that was the Great Compromise. And then we also learned about the 3/5 Compromise, and that would determine how they would count slaves into the population in order to get representation. So obviously the South would want them to be counted as population, and those northern states wouldn't want them to be. And so the compromise was the 3/5 Compromise. So we talked about that. And then just some vocabulary from this week or this time period that we've been learning about is a lot to do with the powers that Congress is given in the Constitution, also state powers, which we'll learn about more specifically when we talk about the Bill of Rights. But so you have enumerated powers, which are, they're written down, they're specific powers that Congress is given. An example of this is taxing. Congress is allowed to tax. So it specifically is written out that Congress can tax. Now we have implied powers, which they're considered just implied. Like it's not necessarily written down, but it's implied. And that's kind of where we got our necessary and proper clause, or the elastic clause that we've been learning about. I have some really good videos that I posted that deal with those and explain and break them down a little more, so you can watch those and kind of understand those concepts. But we will be talking more about that later as we move towards talking about Alexander Hamilton and, him wanting a national bank, and people, it's loose and strict interpretation. So we're going to talk about that more as we move on. So I'm not going to go into too much detail about that now. But so those are some of your vocab words. And then we have the cabinet is one of your vocabulary words, talking about the president's cabinet, because now that when George Washington becomes president, right? Remember, he's chosen by the Electoral College. That's also established in the Constitution. He's going to choose his cabinet members. He's going to appoint people to be in charge of certain departments. We still have that today with the current president, and it's always been a thing. We add cabinets as we need to. So, it could continue to grow. They could add more departments as they see a need for that based on our country's needs. But the cabinet is like a group of advisors. They're people that work for the president in specific branches and determine and make decisions with the president and sometimes for the president. So that's really important. We also learned about political parties, kind of the rise of political parties and the need for political parties. And we discussed in class, why do we have political parties? Why do we still have 2 political parties? Because this is where, we're creating the government. We're starting a new country. We are seeing that there are differences. That's what most people in class said, that they thought there were just too large of differences for people to have one side or the other. Like they wanted, or it needed to be one side or the other. They didn't agree on everything. And so they wanted political parties that had similar views to theirs. And that's back then and today. And so that's where we see the political parties rising. And like I said, we're going to talk about Alexander Hamilton later on, but just something that we did talk about already with him is, he wanted to tax whiskey. And so that's actually going to become a thing. They are going to tax whiskey. And this is going to be known as the whiskey tax. It's really the tax on manufacturing whiskey. And this is obviously going to upset the farmers. They're going to be very upset about this. And so what's going to happen is eventually the farmers are going to be so upset from this extra tax put on them, they feel like they're being penalized and they're already kind of struggling, they go and they march on Washington, and it's known as the Whiskey Rebellion. And George Washington, the president, he actually sends in a large amount of soldiers and troops, sends them in to shut down the rebellion. And this is amazing because he sends in more troops than you need, because he's trying to set an example and show that, America, the new American government, will not be messed with under the Constitution. He says, with Shays' Rebellion, you may have been able to pull this under the Articles of Confederation, but that's not going to fly under the new administration, under the federal Constitution. And so when he does that, people are like, okay, this Constitution is, it's going to be strong, and it's going to be lasting. And that's why we still have it around today with very little amendments. We have less than 30 amendments to our Constitution. That's amazing. It's a lasting document that our founding fathers, really worked hard to foresee the future and think about the needs of the people. So very interesting. So stay tuned. We're going to continue to learn about this, and we're going to talk specifically about Alexander Hamilton and what he wanted. That'll be the next thing that we talk about. So stay tuned.